Welcome back to the Confessed Art Trust. My name is Andy Schlauch. I'm the Executive Director here, and we're going to be showing you our current exhibition called Fooling the Eye. It's a dual artist exhibition featuring the works of Victor Vasarelli and glass artist John Kuhn. I brought these two artists together in this exhibition because I wanted to showcase how two different artists approach the way we perceive and how we understand depth and three-dimensionality and revealing of things to the viewer. Victor Vasarelli was the grandfather of the op art movement that hit its prime in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And op art stands for optical art. His painting that he created of two zebras, one in front of the other, in 1939 is considered to be the first op art piece made. Then we also have John Kuhn, who is a glass artist out of North Carolina, and he works in what we call cold glass. So it's already been created when he receives it, and he does a series of making stacks of colored glass, lead crystal glass, and regular soda lime glass in different ways, and we'll glue them together and slice them in along the bias, and then stack those in turn and glue those together and then slice them again in the bias in order to start creating these forms where he'll then encase them in giant portions of clear glass that he will then create these structures. Learning from Eastern philosophers and particularly about meditation and how everything comes from a center of self and everything you need comes from self. So the work actually reveals basically a physical manifestation of meditation. To start off with, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in this case right here. Even though this is technically not a part of the Fooling the Eye exhibition, it does come up later in the tour. This case is a sampling of our collection of the incredible, masterful artist Paul Stankard, who is considered to be probably the best when it comes to torch work and creating paperweights. I do like people to know that Paul Stankard actually started in creating scientific glass, like beakers, graduated cylinders, and what I mean by that is it had to be absolutely precise so that it could be useful. Well, that was the beginning of his career, but then he, by happenstance, witnessed somebody doing torch work, and that inspired him to set up his own studio and begin practicing his own torchwork techniques starting in the late 1960s. When I'm talking about torchwork, it's very different from glass blowing in many ways, because instead of using molten glass in a furnace and blowing and shaping it and adding color, in this case the artist is using rods of clear glass or colored glass and using a torch in order to manipulate and stretch out that glass to create the motifs you see inside the paperweight. Now, I do like to stress, these works are 100% glass. There are no other elements to this. He handcrafted each petal, each bumblebee, each dragonfly, and created the work, the botanical motif, and then encased it in molten glass. And the other thing you'll notice when you're looking at some of these pieces is the little surprises that he puts in there. Like if you're looking at some of what he calls his botanicals, the tall column-shaped work, and there's a separation where we can see above and below the ground. And if you look very closely to below the ground, you'll see hidden human figures in the roots of the plants. Another really interesting feature is that he likes to put surprises on the bottom of his paperweights and orbs. So we actually have a mirror here so that when you come up to look at it, you can see that there are a couple of faces and again some more human figures underneath there. Like I said, this will come back into conversation in the exhibition. So I just really was excited to share this collection we have in this case before the show. In an effort to help people have a frame of reference for some of the works that are by John Kuhn and Paul Stankard in the exhibition. We'll start with this particular work. This is entitled Joseph's Ribbon. and it was created by John Kuhn for a client of his who wanted him to create this incredible piece. And like I said before, John starts by stacking color and clear glass and lead crystal glass and creating structures that he then glues together further. And he estimated that there's probably about 100,000 pieces of glass in this sculpture. And it took him 3 years to create this. When I put this in the show, this is actually on loan for the artist. One of the things I talk about is that when we perceive color, there is a tendency for cool color spectrum to recede from us and warm color spectrum to come toward us. And I played a little game with my staff where I had them stand at the end of a hallway, and I turned this piece around so that the colder color spectrum is at the front, and what ends up happening is that it looks flatter than it is in real life. But the other thing you get to see that most guests don't get to see, we don't allow this to happen during our tours, is that these pieces may rotate. So you can see the amazing effect that he's creating, especially with what he does to the walls and things like that. For the next pieces we're going to talk about are these 3 works by Victor Vasarely. As I said before, he was the godfather, grandfather, father of the op art movement, and you can see he was really a master of it. And but when you're looking at this painting, it feels like there's a sphere coming out of the center of the canvas, but the truth is the piece is still absolutely flat. So when you're looking at this, even though this was made, only a few decades ago, the methods that he's employing have been used by artists for centuries, going as far back as the Renaissance. And what I mean by that is, first of all, we'll talk about the different shades of color that you see here. In this painting, he's working with a combination of tints, tones, and shades to create an illusion of depth. And a tint is adding white to any solid color, a tone is adding gray, and a shade is adding black. And by masterfully employing those techniques, you can see that adding tints and tones to the colors makes it feel like you see how it's lighter around the edges, so it emphasizes the spherical form. Another trick that he's working with is linear perspective. And linear perspective is simply using lines in order to create a false sense of depth. Most famous would be like the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. If you carefully look at that fresco, the lines that are coming where the ceiling meets the wall or the tops of the tapestries, the sides of the table they're sitting at, all of the lines are leading to what's called a vanishing point that is right behind the head of Jesus. And the artist did that for 2 reasons. One, it brought your focal point to the center of the painting, which was the most important part for the artist, but it also gives a false sense of depth in the painting. And here, Vasarely is using multiple points of linear perspective in order to, again, emphasize and create a false sense of depth and making the sphere look like it's coming out of the center of the painting. Next, we'll talk about these 2 sculptures that Vasarely created that are in our collection. And another trick, if you will, that artists have been working with for hundreds of years is called Trompe. And Trompe is basically trying to make a 3-dimensional object or make an appearance of something 3-dimensional in a flat painting. There's a lot of different examples of this, but in this case where Vasarely is using, again, tones and tints and shades in gradient with his colors here, it's giving a false sense of this piece kind of twisting in on itself. And you can actually play with your brain a little bit and make you see going different directions where the twist is happening. But in truth, it is every bit as flat as the work on canvas. It's just another way of making us perceive movement or depth where there really isn't. Next, we're going to talk about this particular piece. It's called Sigma 5, and it's by John Kuhn. And I think it's a really great example of his sense of revealing something to the viewer. Because if you look closely at this work, there is a structure inside of it that is just pieces of lead crystal glass combined with regular clear glass, soda lime glass. And then he encased that further with clear glass. But one of the things I really like the guests to do is to take turns moving around the piece, because when the light hits it just right, it explodes with color and rainbows and things like that. But if you move ever so slightly, then it also disappears. So when I say I think it's a great example of that reveal, I really do mean it, because the light is what activates it. And it's very engaging as a work, because you have this moment of reveal. But also, what I enjoy about this piece is that it's, unlike his spinning work, it is stationary, so it actually makes you have to move around the work. And then when you look up and around the gallery walls, you see all of this constellations of rainbows and reflections around us that are in part due to how the work was lit and how it reflects light. So it almost creates an environment that's kind of like a side note to what his work does. Remember how I said this was going to come back to our conversation later on when talking about Paul Stankard's work? This is a great example of what I was talking about. Paul Stankard and John Kuhn have been very dear friends since the 1980s. And at some point in the 90s, they decided to begin collaborating together. And they have only done, I believe John told me, around 20 of these collaborative works, but they are incredible pieces. And he was very excited to have them in this exhibition, so he loaned a couple of them to us, and then we also were loaned a piece from Bergstrom Mahler Museum of Glass in Neenah, Wisconsin. And when I say it's a collaborative work, you can see in the center of this particular object that there is the quintessential Paul Stankard floral motif happening in the middle of the piece. And what happened was Paul will create a cube or a column piece with his floral motif, send it to John Kuhn, and John will build his aesthetic around it. And I love the name of these works. The series are called Stancunes, a combination of both artists' last names. And we have 3 amazing examples of these collaborations in our exhibition.